So I look at all my frames. If I don't like one, delete it. I have a dilemma. I have a drive, 6 terabyte drive, and I have 60 gig left on it. So, you know, if it's not perfect, who needs it? I'm not going to stack it. So calibrate and stack. I'll talk about that in a minute. I use a program called Deep Sky Stacker. It's free. That will decrease noise, vignetting, and dust, increases the bit depth and the resolution, and then I edit in a program called Affinity Photo, which is like Photoshop. Now DSS, Deep Sky Stacker, will sometimes refuse to stack. You'll get this nice big run of images, and then you'll go bring it into Deep Sky Stacker and stack it, and not enough stars. You know, it just looks at you like, what am I supposed to do with this? You know, so no problem. Deep Sky Stacker will still calibrate. So you run your flats, your darks, your bias, and then there's a little setting in Deep Sky Stacker that will generate a TIFF file for every one of your frames after it's been calibrated. So great, now I have the data, I can take it into Affinity Photo and stack it in there. And if it won't stack it, I can visually do what's called a live stack and go back to each frame and move them around individually if I have to. So obviously I try to avoid that, but every now and then clouds roll in, you only have just a few frames. So
you can't synthetically put a couple of stars in there to trick Deep Sky Stacker into...
Okay. So if you can do that in less than, and be accurate within less than 1 pixel, let me know. Yeah, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for sub-pixel stacking. Okay, probably not going to happen. And then next time, use a longer exposure, because that's 90% of why Deep Sky Stacker throws up on your data. You weren't off of that left edge. Is really what it boils down to. You're off the left edge. Deep Sky Stacker pretty much stack about anything. So photo editors, what do? All that we care about is adjusting the transfer curve. So the data comes in and you have brightness goes from 0 to whatever, full scale. And then the problem is that because we're shooting astrophotography, things, you know, we're shooting invisible things basically. We need to be able to expand, to stretch out that little bit that's all the way down here in the shadows. We need to stretch that out so we can see it across the entire histogram. So that's called the transfer curve. And if you go into Photoshop or Affinity Photo, you'll see something called curves, and that's what that does. And I'll show you in a minute here. Another thing photo editors do is mask out parts of a layer so you can then composite things together, such as compositing. Well, actually this was, sorry, this was a panorama. So first of all, I had to put all those together and then put this together. So that's all done with masking, where you mask out one part of the image and then let another part of a layer rather shine through to make a composite of different images. They apply blur algorithms, and then they have some tools where you can convert between mono and color, crop, move, and resize a layer or the entire document, painting with a brush or a bucket, and localizing a copy. So clone stamp or healing tool, that's what those do. So we talked about that. Replotting the transfer curve replots the brightness of each pixel. However, whatever that curve does, that's how it's going to replot the brightness. And then the slope tells us the amount of contrast, so we can change. So normally it's at a 45-degree angle. If we crank up that slope, then it's going to get more contrasting. It's going to bring up the brightness of the shadows. And then we can move that entire, shift that entire transfer curve and throw away all the noise. It's called crushing the blacks. So layers, now layers also allow us to have blend modes. So when we're merging our red, green, and blue back together, we use a thing called screen. blend mode. And what that is, it's like, okay, so we have a screen and we painted the blue stuff on this screen and then a red and a green, and then we just kind of shine a light through the back of it like a projection screen, and then we can see all the colors. That's what screen mode does. Multiply will darken the layers because you're literally multiplying pixel by pixel, which makes, and they all go from 0 to 1. So if you multiply numbers below 1, they get smaller. So it darkens layers. Screen overlay and soft light can be used to lighten layers together. So almost everything that a photo editor does is a variation of a blur. Now, if you use a photo editor, you probably never thought of that, but it's true. So contrast is a difference in hue or brightness, and then sharpness is our eye perceives sharpness by an abrupt change between dark and bright, or between two different colors. That's how we see contrast. And we perceive a sharpness of an image by how much contrast there is localized for all of those abrupt changes. So blur, all it does is you have a pixel here and you just kind of add the values of all the other pixels, average the values of all the other pixels around it, and that makes it all blurry when you do that. Noise reduction is selectively blurring areas of less contrast. That's all the noise reduction is. Sharpening is selectively unblurring or increasing that contrast in areas of local contrast. So it's called a masking blur, or sometimes called an unsharp mask. It's like, unsharp mask, what does that have to do with sharpening anything? Well, I'm going to show you. So unsharp mask is you duplicate a pixel layer and you blur the layer and subtract them from each other. So I'm going to show you what that does. So here we have the Cocoon Nebula. I don't remember what the NGC number is for that. So what I have here is, look at this layer is the original image, and then I have an unsharp mask. I turn the unsharp mask on, and you can see it sharpens it up. So there's after, with, there's without. With, without. Okay, everybody see that? That's called an unsharp mask. What does that mean? All right, so what we did here is to make a duplicate. So let me turn that off, turn this one on, and there's our blurred version. Blurring, again, is taking every pixel and adding the values of its neighboring pixels, and that makes it blur out. And if we do it according to a Gaussian curve, it's called a Gaussian blur. So that's where Gaussian blurs come from. So you can see here's our duplicate, here's our Gaussian blur that's being applied to it. And now I'm going to subtract those two images from each other, and then I'm going to give it a curve just so you can see what actually happened. So you see all of these areas in here, that's the difference between the sharp and the blurred. So it's an unsharp, right? So we're seeing the unsharp areas. And now if we use that unsharp to mask, make a mask of a contrast adjustment, we have an unsharp mask. So let me turn that back off. And now I'm going to, I have here, that's that mask right here, and I'm going to turn on the contrast through the mask. And you can see it's the same effect. Without, with. So that's what unsharp mask is. Sharpness is purely just a matter of the difference of contrast, localized contrast of within your image. So that's what an unsharp mask. And if I add them together, then it gets really nice and sharp. So that's what an unsharp mask. So yeah, this is kind of, again, no extra charge for that, but I just wanted everybody to understand all that these photo editors do is blur things. They don't actually make anything sharper.
Is this Affinity?
Just increase, I'm sorry?
Is this Affinity Photo?
Yes, this is Affinity Photo. This is not Photoshop. But you can do exactly the same stuff in Photoshop. It's just done differently.
How big is that tip after it's done?
Oh, it says it right here. This is 35 or 3735 by 3520.
File size.
Yeah, file size 13 megapixels. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay. So now you know what an unsharp mask is. You're probably one of the few people that you'll ever meet that, or even cares. So Affinity Photo, or whatever your editor of choice. Color channels, this is my workflow here. Channels to balance the colors. There's a thing called channel mixer. Curves to stretch the dynamic range, and curves and contrast to increase the overall sharpness. The unsharp mask to decrease detail, increase sharpness details. Denoise to remove noise. And what is denoising? It's blurring areas of low contrast. That's all it is, taking away that. Blend modes to composite layers and highlights to balance stars. So we're going to look at the Eastern Veil. So we'll, first of all, calibrate and stack. How am I on time? Everybody? Passed?
It's 9:15.
Okay, show of hands. Who wants to stay? See the demo. Okay, good. Everybody's, all right. Thank you. Thank you. Calibrate, first of all, we'll calibrate and stack. We're going to use Deep Sky Stacker, and then we'll edit, and I'll just blow through this really quickly, as quick as I can, okay? So back to Affinity Photo, and here's our Eastern, well, wait. We're going to stack it first. Okay, back to Deep Sky Stacker. So here's my raw data. Isn't that beautiful? Have you ever seen such a thing in your life? So this is one thing. Astrophotography will build your faith, okay? Because you look at that and it's like there will never be anything come out of that. Trust me, there'll be something beautiful come out of it. If you look real carefully, you can see the Eastern Veil right here. Does it even show up? Yeah, I guess it shows up a little bit. Okay. So I took, that night, I have 10 frames and, 10 2-minute frames. This was shot with the one-shot color camera. And what I like about one-shot color for what would normally be considered a narrowband object is one-shot color shows me the exact color of stuff. When you shoot narrowband, you're shooting monochrome, and the colors that you end up with is because you thought, I think it should be that color. But there's nothing that actually makes it that color. Whereas when you're doing one-shot color, you get the actual colors. So you'll see a lot of the Eastern Veil. Eastern Veil is where a star went supernova. I don't remember, it's like 10,000 or 100,000 years ago, something like that. Anyway, it's really big. It covers a couple of degrees of the sky. And you have the Western Veil on this side and the Eastern Veil on this side. It's where it blew apart. So we're looking at just the eastern side of it here. Well, it came from a supernova, which means there's more than just hydrogen and oxygen. There's all kinds of elements in there, all the way up to uranium, right? I mean, it's a supernova. So we should be able to see more colors than just red and blue. And that's normally what you'll see, or red and green, whatever. That's normally what you'll see if somebody has captured this narrowband. And this is why people capture a narrowband, because it looks horrible. Okay. So I took and stacked all of these, and I did it with a 122nd dark. Now, nice thing about Deep Sky Stacker is once you've stacked that 122nd darks of all that, it makes a master dark. And then from now on, you only have to use master dark. So I have a master dark, master flat, master offset. And that's beyond the scope of what I'm able to tell you right now, but those are good things to have. Really good things to have, okay? All three of them, trust me. So here's my ugly picture. I did the stacking and I got Oh, well, I'm sorry. My computer decided it needed to update itself, so I'm not able to show you that right now. It was pretty much equally ugly, okay? So you don't have to use too much imagination. In fact, it looked just like that, okay? So after the stacking, remember before stacking, really hideous. After stacking, not quite as hideous, but still, it's like, where are we ever going to get anywhere with this? Well, let me show you. So here we have, look over here on toward the right side of the screen. Here's the eastern veil. It's the only thing checked. It's the only thing turned on. This is the raw data from Deep Sky Stacker. So let's add some curves and see what we get. Oh, curves are nice. And what if I bring down the shadows a little bit? Can I get anything from that? No, not too much. What about some contrast? There we go. Contrast. Contrast overall is going to make your darks darker. So if you have the background sky is almost where you want it, just add contrast and it'll take your sky and make it even darker for you. So here's a channel mixer. Okay, we needed that because, and there's the shadows. We needed a channel mixer because we had some curves up here. Okay, now we're nice and gray. This is our first waypoint. You want to get to the point where your background is gray. Because once you have a gray background and all your colors are nice and happy, then now you can start using your curves to try and squeeze out the background sky and enhance the signal. So squeezing out the noise, enhancing the signal. One more thing I wanted to bring up is that in the last processing part here of Deep Sky Stacker, you have three things here. The levels, the luminance, which you can change that curve, which is kind of handy to do sometimes. And then you can also change saturation. I find that in my setup, if I pump up the saturation about 20% before I save it off, then I have more colors to work with. Otherwise, I have to really push the colors in Affinity Photo, and they only like being pushed so much, and then they get really mad at you. So let's add some more contrast. Ooh, now we're getting somewhere. And let's add some curves here. And now, honestly, it looks a little too vibrant to me, so I'm going to turn down the saturation just a little bit there. And now let me go ahead and turn on the noise. So this is basically how I did this. Now, that whole operation took, half an hour of experimenting. Well, let me try this. Well, let me try this. Let me try this, and just kind of knowing, having done this 100 times or whatever, that, yeah, I know this slider's going to do this and this slider's going to do that. So that's kind of how you get there. Let me show you the channel mixer. So I select which channel I want to mix. So here's my red channel, and then red is at 100%. And that's usually when I shoot with this camera, red is the least color, green is the highest, and blue is kind of somewhere in between. So I kind of leave red alone most of the time. Which, if you've ever done color printing, usually leave, when you're doing negative printing, usually leave cyan alone, which cyan is the opposite of red, so it kind of makes sense. Red, and then let's look at our green. So on that, I brought the green down 87%. That just gave me a better mix. And then the blue, I brought that down to 90%. But it can also change the offsets. So let me go back to green for a second here. And see, now this gets real sensitive. So 1%, you see, it just sucked out all the green. Because remember, we're way down here in the shadow part of the histogram. And so you push that over just a few percentages and you've thrown away all your data. So you have to be real careful with that offset. But on the other hand, it can get you out of a lot of trouble too. So I use that, my basic channel mixer, and then again, the brightness and contrast. See, I pumped the contrast to 100%. So that's just kind of getting the ball rolling. So with that, and the shadows, I now pump the shadows down 200%. So now I have what I've done is very gently stretched out that histogram. So now when I go into curves, one little change in a curve doesn't just wipe me out. Okay, I've done a little bit of pre-processing on my curve. So now I go into the curve and see it very gentle. Here's the, what is this area over here? Nothing but noise. It's nothing. Here, let me reset this. So that's what we had, and that's what we ended up with. Great thing about Affinity Photo, I assume Photoshop probably does this too, but see this little button down here called Picker? So let me go reset again, and I'll click on Picker, and Picker, I can pick out a shadow area, say right here where there's no stars, nothing I care about, and just pull that down, and look, it's the same place it was before. Okay, so now all of a sudden, now I have goodness there, and I can go to a bright area and push it up a little bit. And you'll notice I push this up such that it never goes above the line. So I'm doing the asymptote here. Don't want to go above that line because what happens then? Now I'm blowing out stars. And not a good thing to blow out stars. So after that, then I did another curves adjustment, but you'll notice instead of doing a master curve, I did a red and a blue curve because they just needed a little bit of touching up. The colors weren't right. You can only do so much in the channel mixer, and so sometimes you just need to go in and you can pick out and change the curve of a single color channel. And so that was my next step. And then punching up the contrast a little more. Not sure why I did that. Yeah, I disagree that I did that. I'm going to take it off. And then again, it seemed a little too colorful to me. So just pull the saturation down a few points. There you go. That's how you do it. So that is how you do astrophotography. Thank you.